The morning mist clung to the hills of Thermopylae like a shroud, but it was not the vapor that made enemy soldiers shiver. Across the narrow pass, 300 Spartan warriors stood in perfect formation, their bronze shields catching the first rays of dawn. Each shield bore the lambda symbol of Lacedaemon, polished to mirror brightness that could blind enemies even before combat began. The red cloaks of the warriors hung motionless in the still air, creating a wall of crimson that seemed to pulse with life against the grey stone backdrop. But these men were not preparing for battle in the way their enemies expected. They were singing. The sound began as a low rumble, emerging from deep within their chests like distant thunder rolling across mountains. King Leonidas himself led the chant, his voice carrying the weight of Spartan tradition that stretched back 3 centuries. This was not spontaneous expression. It was a weapon forged through generations of warfare, refined in the crucible of countless battles, where psychological dominance meant the difference between victory and annihilation. The sound that emerged from their throats was unlike anything heard on ancient battlefields. It was not a war cry, not a chant of victory. It was something far more unsettling. The paean, as the Greeks called it, was a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the very stones of the earth. The rhythm followed an ancient meter, 7 beats that matched the human heartbeat under extreme stress, creating a subliminal resonance that penetrated bone and sinew. Military historians today recognize this as one of the most sophisticated psychological weapons ever deployed in ancient warfare. The melody itself was built on the Dorian mode, a musical scale that Greek theorists understood created feelings of solemnity and foreboding. Unlike the major scales that inspire joy or the minor scales that evoke sadness, the Dorian mode existed in a liminal space, neither happy nor sad, but something altogether more primal and unsettling. Persian musicians, who had studied the effects of music on human emotion, recognized the deliberate malevolence in these tones and reported back to their commanders with barely concealed terror. The Spartan paean was not merely music, it was calculated terror. Each note was designed to penetrate the mind of the enemy, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into panic. The melody carried across the battlefield with an otherworldly quality, its rhythm matching the steady beat of marching feet, creating an hypnotic effect that disrupted enemy concentration. Persian soldiers, hardened by countless campaigns across the known world, found themselves unable to focus on their weapons. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rocky walls of the pass until it became impossible to determine how many Greeks actually stood before them. This was no accident. The acoustics of Thermopylae had been studied by Spartan commanders who understood that the terrain itself could become a weapon. But the paean was only the beginning. As the haunting melody continued, the Spartans began their ritualistic preparation for battle. The diamastigosis, a ceremony that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. Every movement was deliberate, performed with a precision that spoke of years of training. They combed their long hair with meticulous care, using bronze combs, decorated with intricate patterns, each stroke designed to create the image of men preparing for a symposium rather than slaughter. The hair was then braided with practiced efficiency, creating elaborate patterns that would remain intact even through the violence of close combat. Next came the oiling of their bodies, not mere vanity, but calculated psychological warfare. They used olive oil mixed with aromatic herbs, rosemary for remembrance of the dead they would create, thyme for courage, and sage for wisdom in killing. The mixture had a practical purpose. It made their skin slippery and difficult to grasp in hand-to-hand combat, but the psychological impact was far more significant. The sweet fragrance carried on the morning breeze, reaching Persian nostrils and creating a disturbing juxtaposition, the scent of a wedding feast combined with the reality of impending massacre. Each warrior then adjusted his equipment with the casual precision of a craftsman arranging tools. The bronze cuirass was polished until it gleamed like captured sunlight, each piece of armor checked not for flaws, but for maximum visual impact. They tightened the leather straps of their sandals with deliberate slowness, ensuring that even their footwear would provide secure footing for the work ahead. The spears were inspected, not for sharpness, that was assumed, but for the perfect balance that would allow them to punch through Persian armor with minimal effort. This display of vanity in the face of overwhelming odds was perhaps the most chilling aspect of all. Enemy observers could not comprehend warriors who treated their final moments as a grooming session. The psychological impact was devastating. Here were men so confident in their abilities, so prepared for death, that they viewed the coming battle as merely another day's work. The Persians had faced many enemies across their vast empire. They had conquered proud peoples and broken fierce warriors. But they had never encountered anything like this deliberate, almost theatrical preparation for combat. The message was clear and terrifying. These were not ordinary soldiers fighting for survival. These were death itself, given human form. Greek military doctrine recognized that battles were won before the first spear was thrown. The mind of the enemy was the primary battlefield, and fear was the most effective weapon. What appeared to be mere ritual was actually sophisticated psychological warfare, developed over centuries of conflict and refined to perfection by warrior societies like Sparta. The effectiveness of these tactics extended far beyond individual battles. Word of Greek psychological warfare spread throughout the ancient world, creating a reputation that preceded their armies like a plague. Babylonian tablets describe Persian soldiers requesting transfers rather than face Greek forces. Egyptian chronicles record mercenaries breaking contracts upon learning their enemies would be Greek. Even the fearsome Scythian horsemen, who had terrorized the steppes for generations, spoke in hushed tones of the singing death that Greek warriors brought to battle. Enemy commanders found themselves fighting not just against Greek soldiers, but against the terrifying legends that surrounded them. Persian General Mardonius documented in his personal correspondence how his own officers would become visibly agitated when Greek paeans were heard in the distance. Some commanders resorted to deploying their forces beyond audible range of Greek camps, but this strategy often resulted in tactical disadvantages that proved decisive in battle. The psychological preparation also served an internal purpose that modern military psychologists have come to understand. By engaging in these elaborate rituals, Greek warriors were programming their own minds for combat. The familiar patterns of grooming and equipment preparation created a meditative state that suppressed fear and heightened focus. Neurological studies of modern soldiers show that repetitive, ritualistic behavior before combat releases endorphins and reduces cortisol levels, effects that the Greeks had discovered through centuries of empirical observation. As the sun climbed higher over Thermopylae, the paean reached its crescendo. The 300 Spartans stood ready, their psychological preparation complete. They had transformed themselves from mere men into instruments of terror, and their enemies knew it. The battle had already begun in the minds of those who would face them. The psychological warfare employed by the Greeks was not primitive superstition. It was sophisticated understanding of human psychology that modern military analysts still study today. The paean, the grooming rituals, and the theatrical displays of confidence were all based on principles that would not be formally recognized by psychology until thousands of years later. The human brain, when confronted with the unknown, defaults to fear. Greek commanders understood this instinctively through what they called the wisdom of Ares, practical knowledge gained from observing how men behaved under the stress of combat. The paean exploited what neuroscientists now call the startle response, the involuntary reaction to unexpected auditory stimuli. But Greek understanding went deeper than simple surprise. The 7-beat rhythm of the paean was specifically chosen to match the heart rate of a human under extreme stress, approximately 180 beats per minute. When enemy soldiers heard this rhythm, their own hearts began to synchronize with it unconsciously, creating a physiological state of panic even before any physical threat materialized. Modern military researchers have confirmed this phenomenon, noting that rhythmic auditory stimuli can indeed manipulate heart rate and breathing patterns in combat situations. The Greeks also understood the concept of infrasound, frequencies below the threshold of human hearing that nevertheless affect human physiology. Certain formations of the paean included vocal techniques that generated these subsonic frequencies, causing feelings of unease, dizziness, and nausea in listeners. Archaeological analysis of ancient Greek theatres shows similar acoustic engineering, suggesting that this knowledge was systematically applied across Greek culture. The timing of these psychological attacks was crucial. Greek warriors would begin their paean just as enemy forces came within sight, but remained out of weapon range. This created what modern psychologists term anticipatory anxiety, a state where the mind races through countless scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Enemy soldiers found themselves fighting imaginary battles long before the real one commenced. The grooming rituals served a dual purpose that military historians have only recently begun to appreciate. On the surface, the act of combing hair and oiling skin appeared to be vanity or religious observance, but the deeper psychological impact was far more sinister. Warriors who took time to perfect their appearance before battle were communicating supreme confidence. They were so certain of victory that aesthetic concerns took precedence over military preparation. The specific details of these rituals were loaded with meaning that enemy observers could not help but interpret. The elaborate braiding of hair suggested men planning to survive the battle. Why else would they invest time in hairstyles that would last for days? Yet the aromatic oils carried scents associated with funeral rites, suggesting they were also prepared for death. This contradiction created cognitive dissonance in enemy minds, a psychological state that impairs decision-making and increases anxiety. The timing of the grooming ritual was equally calculated. It began exactly when enemy forces moved within visual range, but remained beyond effective weapon distance, what Greek tacticians called the zone of contemplation. This forced enemy soldiers to watch the entire ritual, building anticipation and dread for precisely the optimal duration to maximize psychological impact. Persian military records describe how some soldiers would close their eyes or look away during these displays, but commanding officers noted that this only increased overall unit anxiety and decreased battlefield awareness. This display of casual confidence in the face of death violated every instinct that enemy soldiers possessed. Normal warriors showed fear, urgency, desperation, emotions that enemy commanders could understand and counter. But men who treated battle like a social gathering represented something beyond comprehension, something that suggested either divine protection or inhuman indifference to mortality. The effectiveness of these tactics was documented by enemy historians who witnessed Greek warfare firsthand. Persian chronicles describe the unsettling calm of Greek warriors, noting how their composed demeanor seemed to drain courage from opposing forces. Roman military manuals, written centuries later, specifically warned against allowing troops to observe Greek pre-battle rituals, recognizing their demoralizing effect. Archaeological evidence supports these historical accounts with remarkable detail. Excavations at ancient battlefields have revealed Greek camps positioned to maximize the acoustic impact of their ceremonies. The arrangement of stones and the construction of temporary structures show clear understanding of sound projection and psychological intimidation. At Marathon, archaeologists discovered evidence of artificially created acoustic chambers, circular arrangements of shields and bronze reflectors that amplified and directed the paean toward enemy positions. Recent digital reconstructions using computer modeling have confirmed that these acoustic arrangements could project sound across distances of up to 2 kilometers with minimal distortion. The Greeks had essentially created ancient loudspeakers using principles of acoustics that would not be formally understood until the Renaissance. Analysis of bronze shield fragments shows deliberate modifications, small dents and curves that were not battle damage but intentional alterations to improve acoustic properties. Even more remarkably, excavations at Plataea uncovered what appears to be an ancient psychological warfare manual, bronze tablets inscribed with detailed instructions for conducting pre-battle rituals. The tablets specify exact timings, formations, and even include notation for different variations of the paean, depending on enemy types. Facing Persians required different psychological tactics than facing Thracians or Scythians, and the Greeks had developed specialized approaches for each. Modern military training incorporates many of the same principles that made Greek psychological warfare so effective. Special forces units worldwide study the art of projecting confidence under pressure, understanding that mental dominance often determines the outcome of conflicts before physical violence begins. The legacy of Greek psychological warfare extends far beyond ancient battlefields, influencing military doctrine in ways that most modern soldiers never realize. Their understanding that fear was humanity's greatest weakness became a fundamental principle of military strategy, codified in training manuals and tactical doctrine across cultures and centuries. Generals throughout history have employed variations of Greek tactics, from the Roman legions' synchronized marching and rhythmic chanting to Napoleon's use of artillery barrages designed more to terrify than destroy. During World War II, both Allied and Axis forces studied ancient Greek texts on psychological warfare. The British Special Operations Executive incorporated paean-like vocal techniques in their training, while German SS units adopted ritualistic preparation methods directly inspired by Spartan practices. Modern special forces worldwide still employ synchronized movement and vocalization techniques that trace their lineage directly back to Greek psychological warfare doctrine. The influence extends into civilian applications as well. Sports psychologists have identified the Greek principle, the idea that mental preparation and confident display can defeat opponents before physical competition begins. Olympic ceremonies, military parades, and even corporate presentations employ psychological techniques first developed on ancient Greek battlefields. The Greeks had discovered a truth that modern warfare still acknowledges with reluctant respect. The most powerful weapon is not the sharpest sword or the strongest shield. It is the ability to break an enemy's will to fight. Their paean was not just music. It was the sound of victory itself, a psychological symphony that could make hardened warriors question their courage before battle was joined. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae understood this principle perfectly. They knew that their sacrifice would echo through history, not because of their physical prowess, but because of the psychological impact they created. Their legacy lives on in every military unit that uses intimidation, ceremony, and calculated confidence to achieve victory before battle begins. If you found this deep dive into ancient psychological warfare fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more hidden secrets of military history. Hit that like button if you learned something new about how the Greeks mastered the art of mental warfare, and let us know in the comments which ancient military tactic you'd like us to explore next. Your engagement helps us bring these incredible historical stories to light.